Hello, Void and all who inhabit it. It's me, and today we're talking about everyone's least favorite cartoon.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show!
I'm overwhelmed by life, so I thought I would give my brain a break by hyperfixating on an old favorite of mine. Courage the Cowardly Dog was my first experience with horror as something more than nightmare fuel, which I know, we'll get to those, and my first experience with Gothic literature as a whole. I don't fuck with horror. I was jump scared during PB's Big Adventure, and I have never been the same since. I wasn't built for that. But Gothic literature is some of my favorite type of fiction, and is really at the foundation of a lot of things that I not only enjoy engaging with, but create myself. And that all started with Courage the Cowardly Dog. Before we get to that, however, what is Gothic literature? Gothic literature is a genre of fiction that emerged in the 18th century, specifically the 1790s, that features extreme circumstances of terror, oppression, and persecution, darkness and obscurity of setting, and innocence betrayed, amongst other ooky spooky things. American Gothic literature has a few tweaks based off of cultural differences of what goes bump in the night, but Gothic literature is the foundation for most of our ooky spooky media today. In Courage the Cowardly Dog specifically, there are a few Gothic themes that pop up quite a bit. The first is the idea of the damsel in distress, of course, with Muriel. There are also instances of magical realism or fantastical elements, which this is a cartoon, yes, but some of the stuff is specifically weird beyond just like it's a cartoon and nobody can die, kinda. We also have the questioning of rationality. You could even go further to say the rational versus the irrational. Again, it's a cartoon, so there are irrational things that happen, but I think this theme pops up the most in episodes where Courage asks the computer for help. My favorite example of this is the episode where Eustace turns into a giant fungus-ridden foot, and one of Courage's immediate things is to go to the computer and ask, how do I get rid of this? He's looking for a rational way to solve an irrational problem, leading that clash of like, what the fuck is really going on here? There is also the importance of location. In European and British Gothic stories, there's often a decrepit mansion or an old crumbling castle that's really important for the story. In American Gothic literature, it is often a decrepit plantation that's really important to the story. In Gothic literature, the location can often serve as an additional character, and in Courage the Cowardly Dog, our location is nowhere, Kansas. It seems like it should be a safe place to live, but creepy stuff happens in nowhere, and the isolation of the Bag family specifically contributes to their interaction with everything from ducks from out of space to goose gods. There's a lot of treacherous fouls in this show, I'm realizing. Anyway, that brings us to the evil characters. The idea of ghosts, goblins, ghouls, zombies with no options, that comes from Gothic literature specifically, and Courage the Cowardly Dog explores everything from the uncanny to the abhuman. But most importantly, there are three major traits that I think places Courage the Cowardly Dog as Gothic literature specifically, as opposed to comedy horror generally. The existence of the other, the emphasis on psychological fear, and the exploration of excess. Starting with the existence of the other, the bulk of Courage the Cowardly Dog episodes can fit into this bucket. You can also consider these the Muriel is in danger episodes. The existence of the other in Gothic literature often serves as the template of what is described as monstrous in the story. That which we find monstrous is often based on things we feel detached from our own humanity. Again, going back to the idea of the abhuman, a vampire is almost human, but there's something that makes them uncomfortably not like us. Well, unless you're a monster fucker. Ooh, sorry. In that, even in monster fucking, truly, there is a tension between the monstrous other and the self that is centric to Gothic literature. Before diving into the way Courage the Cowardly Dog sets this up with the Ookie Spooky in who was trying to kidnap Muriel this time, I think it's important for us to unravel the roles that D. Lung and Dr. Vindaloo play as others, especially considering that after Eustace and Muriel, these two characters are some of the most reoccurring humans in the entire series. The creation of the other utilizes the existence of a being who is foreign, right? A vampire, again, a werewolf, a zombie, an abhuman character is othered to humans, but sometimes the creation of the other literally means using somebody who is just foreign to your culture or the culture of the story. In Gothic literature, both British and American, there is a long history of making the feared character, the feared other, a person of color. We don't see this as much with Dr. Vindaloo. Other than being a microcosm of Indian stereotypes and caricatures, he's just incompetent, like he's more an unhelpful ally than an active antagonist, but his foreignness is still used to other him. On the flip side, D. Lung fits perfectly into the Gothic tradition of making the evil and other in a specifically racist way. And I think there are two episodes that really highlight this. The first is Courage versus Mecha Courage, an episode from the second season. This episode starts with D. Lung randomly showing up on bag property, deciding that Courage is a bad dog and deciding that he can make a better dog, aka Mecha Courage. The whole conflict of the episode is centered around the introduction of an other, Mecha Courage, by an other, D. Lung. Neither of them fit into the bag's household, and thus their introduction to it threatens its stability, specifically for Courage. This episode is a great summary of the role D. Lung is supposed to play. He comes in to disrupt shit for no reason and then will leave again. Beyond this, however, I think the sound design of this episode is a really good example of the subtle ways that I wrote DL in my notes and I'm like, what? That DL's otherness and his foreignness is evil. Every time he shows up and he does something, every time Mecha Courage shows up and it does something, there is this stereotypical East Asian music playing in the background.
Hey, K9! Courage dog. Wanna play fetch?
And I say stereotypical East Asian music very broadly because it is not confirmed that D. Lung is Chinese until season 4 with the episode Squatting Tiger, Hidden Dog. This episode starts with a conversation between D. Lung and his aunt, the evil Empress of China, A. Shen, as they discuss how her power is waning because the spell or whatever is fading and she needs the bones of an innocent to reclaim her power. This episode is explicitly racist in its depiction of the other, both with the evil Empress and the good Empress. So the evil Empress, she has green skin, she has feet so tightly bound that she floats, and she speaks uncaptioned Mandarin Chinese, which is important and we'll get to that later. The good Empress has normal colored skin. We actually don't really see her body very often, but her head is placed on the bodies of animals a lot, which, girl, I don't know. And she speaks English. I bring up the language gap because the evil Empress speaking uncaptioned Mandarin Chinese means that the viewer most likely is dependent on D. Lung to understand what she's saying because he basically repeats what she says when he answers her. And in that, the gap between me as the viewer and the evil Empress as the character is widened because I don't even understand this lady. So how can I see her as anything other than, this villainous force versus the good Empress who speaks English, who's nice. And yes, one of them is good and one of them is evil, but the way that goodness and evil is set up is very intentional and specific. The evil Empress is the epitome of the foreign, scary other, and D. Lung is her evil henchman, basically, for the entire episode. I bring up the evil empress, the good empress, D Lung, and Dr. Vindaloo, not just because the last two at least pop up quite often, and any humans that exist in the show stick out because there are so few, but because Gothic literature, and specifically the existence of an other, is often used to teach us a value. You are taught something about yourself when you are presented with someone to contrast your experience with. So what are we being taught through the portrayals of these characters, even if the episodes they are in are the most shallow, are the ones most lacking in moral fiber? The last thing I'll say about the use of an other is that Courage the Cowardly Dog was on some other shit when it came to monster creation, okay? However, as vast and as long-lasting as some of these depictions are, the Monster of the Week episodes often don't have a deeper meaning, which will become important as we look at the other two major themes. When it comes to exploring the idea of an other specifically, the second major theme actually does a better job of this, and that is the emphasis on psychological fear. You might look at a lot of old Gothic stories and be like, oh, those are scary. And yeah, but no. The big difference between Gothic literature and horror literature is the emphasis on psychological fear. A good example of American Gothic literature is Beloved by Toni Morrison. In that novel, Sethi is haunted, literally, by the grown apparition of her long-dead daughter. But it's not the existence of the ghost that's scary, but the guilt and the shame and the trauma that Sethi has been carrying since her daughter's death. That is manifested in the presence of a ghost, but it's those underlying emotions that Sethi has to deal with throughout the course of the story. You can contrast an experience like that, a story like that, with Freddy Krueger, who initially returns for revenge, yes, but then he's just continuously murking people because he can. He is scary, but he's not symbolic of a specific psychological conflict for any one main character. In Gothic literature, it is expected that the monster, the other, the antagonist is actually symbolic of something else, and often symbolic of something for the main character themselves to be dealing with. In Courage the Cowardly Dog, psychological fear and the idea of an underlying issue to actually be concerned about is often translated in episodes where courage befriends or helps the monster. It's not the hunchback that should be feared, but the hatred that's hurled at him for existing. It's not Dr. Zalos that is the problem, but the way depression can crush you and those around you. Kitty isn't a villain, she's traumatized and trying to save Bunny from an abusive relationship. Courage uncovers what is at the root of these characters' struggles because he stops or is forced to stop and consider deeper, to ask more questions, to figure out what is really going on, why are you doing this? These are our virtue embossed episodes. They have more meaning than the Muriel is in danger type of episodes. You are meant to walk away a bit changed, to have a shift in your perspective after seeing Courage deal with the Hunchback or Dr. Zalos or whoever. You leave with the understanding that there is no monster, or rather the monster isn't who or what you initially thought it to be, but you get to that point because there is still something to be terrified about, even if that initial being is no longer seen as threatening. Another example is the episode Hothead, where Eustace signs up to be the test subject for a hair growth tonic that has a violent side effect. Courage spends that whole episode trying to keep Eustace calm because he is terrified at the idea of him or Muriel being on the receiving end of Eustace's wrath. There is no monster, but there is still very much something for Courage to be terrified about. Hothead is also a great overlapping example of the third major theme, the exploration of excess. Gothic literature has been described as pushing towards extremes and excess, and that, of course, implies an investigation of limits. In exploring extremes, whether cruelty, rapacity, and fear, or passion and sexual degradation, the Gothic tends to reinforce, if only in a novel's final pages, culturally prescribed doctrines of morality and propriety. Gothic literature is often a cautionary tale made scary. The Mask of the Red Death is a great example of this. The moral of that story is maybe you rich fucks shouldn't have thought yourselves immune by scrolling away to have a party while thousands of poor people are dying due to this virus. Timely. With Courage, a Cowardly Dog, often the cautionary tale we are getting is do not be like Eustace. Do not be so driven by greed and selfishness and stubbornness that you put yourself and your family in harm's way constantly. In these episodes, the biggest monster is Eustace. So many villains are brought into their lives because of his greed, but his piss poor behavior is at the center of strife, even if there isn't a third party who is enacting the doom and gloom. I know everyone hates it, but the King Ramses episode is an excellent example not only of Eustace's excess being the cause of the suffering here on today, but of him ultimately being punished in the end. The last scene shows him cursed to be part of the plaque. He is never rewarded for his greed, even if there are so many episodes whose entire plot line is fueled by the existence of it. I personally love the King Ramses episode, but I think common reaction to it, a widespread opinion of it, is a great example of the overlap between terror and horror that leaves a lot of people not really liking Courage the Cowardly Dog and seeing it as just like a creepy, weird show. It is creepy, it is weird, but it is mislabeled as just that because of a lot of, the weird, uncanny monsters, because of the body horror. But more than visually upsetting you, Courage the Cowardly Dog explores the idea of fear and a lot of good values in a particularly gothic way. The last episode of this series is the episode with the fish in the bathtub that I think a lot of people have seen. But that episode talks about perfection, and it does so in a way that is like weird and uncomfortable, but the moral of the episode is that nobody is perfect and that is okay. And that is the point of Courage the Cowardly Dog, is to leave you with a message. There are multiple gothic themes within the show that help make it unsettling, but ultimately the show isn't meant to scare you. It is meant to enhance or to leave you with a moral. Be kind to others, be kind to yourself, and don't grow up to be a greedy old bastard. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. This light honey, is this loud? I'm sorry. Anyway, what's your current procrastination piece of media of choice? I watched all of Shadow and Bone in one day. I watched all of Invincible. So mine has actually been this Turkish drama called Sen Çal Kapımı. I can't speak Turkish, girl. I know I didn't say that correctly. But yeah, what are you watching to ignore life as we know it? I would love to know. And if you want to talk about Turkish drama, girl, hit me up, child, because I spend 2 hours almost every night watching this show in a language I don't understand with terrible captions. Anyway, that's all. I don't know where to look. This is weird. I'm sure my eyes are like the sun is beaming. And I have to get back to work. So I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.